Oh, hi. My name is Zachary Kelman. I am the managing partner at Kelman.Law. We've been in the space for about 7 years. We're a New York-based boutique law firm focusing on crypto. And I would like to show you a few of my friends.
Do you link Bitcoin and its future to money laundering and crime, or can it actually go legit?
I think about most of these cryptocurrencies, it just identifies how much money laundering there is being done in the world.
I thank you for that question.
This is an asset, and it's a highly speculative asset, which has conducted some funny business and some interesting and totally reprehensible money laundering activity.
I am completely on Rogoff's and Lagarde's line. It's a horrible thing. It uses energy like there's no tomorrow. The site to produce this piece of nothing. We are polluting the solution, polluting the environment with this damn thing. And the only useful thing it is, if that's useful, is for criminal activity.
And as a medium of exchange, here's a problem. You don't know whether or not you're paying the North Koreans or Al Qaeda or the Revolutionary Guard.
So I actually believe you're seeing the demand for it, but let's be clear, if we created a true global digital currency, I hate the word crypto, a digitized currency, then then you would not have money laundering anymore. You would have everything understood, everything would be flowing through, everything would be identified.
The governments are not going to allow pseudonymous transactions on a big scale. They're just not going to allow it. The regulation will come in. The government will win.
Cryptocurrencies are a particular concern. I think many are used, at least in a transactions sense, mainly for illicit financing.
The thing that I'm trying to get at is whether you believe ultimately there is a way to actually have an anti-money laundering feature that actually works in and around Bitcoin in the same way that our current monetary system is able to, or the banking system rather, has ALM built into it.
I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were back. Yeah, I was just receiving some Bitcoin from one of my clients, or, if you ask Lloyd Blankfein, Al Qaeda, for an ALM policy, or AML policy I had done. But anyway, I'm actually here to talk to you about Bitcoin, as well as other cryptos, and the regulation in the United States. I'm going to focus particularly on two things. The travel rule, which is a non-US, it's a FATF international rule for how crypto exchanges should be regulated. And then I'm going to talk to you about this new custodial rule that we've heard for non-custodial wallets, a regulation that hasn't passed yet, but appears to be on the way soon from the Treasury Department. But before I get into these issues, I want to talk a little bit about the video we just watched and the current kind of regulatory environment, because we could talk all day about law and crypto. There's going to be a panel later where I'm sure they'll touch on these issues as well. But I really want to talk about the way that we are discussing this issue, not just the law itself, but how we've been discussing it. So, in a nutshell, my view is pretty simple. The law this presumption that we have in all these conversations, in all the videos you just watched, whether it's Janet Yellen, Lloyd Blankfein, Mr. Fink, CEO of BlackRock, and so forth, they all seem to be on the same page, which is they think Bitcoin is akin to money laundering, which is something we hadn't necessarily heard from them, and it matches what we've seen recently in the U.S. in this kind of Biden administration U.S. configuration, which is the SEC is now chaired by someone who's seen as crypto friendly, much like the kind of crypto mom of the past, Hester Pierce, who worked for the SEC. The current Gensler, who's going to be the head of the SEC, is a sort of pro-crypto person, but that's securities law. Anti-money laundering has nothing to do with Gensler. It has to do with the Treasury Department, which is now run by Janet Yellen, who you saw in that clip. Very different. So from Yellen's approach, we'll see what she's going to do, but I have a feeling we're going to see more stringent KYC measures, just like this wallet rule. I'm going to get into that and explain kind of the context of where these laws came from and how we got to where we are. But I want to identify the common thread that all of them have, which is yeah, Bitcoin is money laundering, but more importantly, they all seem to be very aware of this idea that there should be this panopticon that reviews all the transactions, that can actually see your KYC information, receive it, process it, and deal with it in a way that, it has to be a mechanism by which you can prevent the bad people from trading and make sure that the good people can. It's more or less a system that can act as a goaltender between the good money, which is seen as not money laundering, and the bad money that is. And I know the term money laundering automatically presumes that it's bad people, but we have to remember it's a term of art. I mean, a sanction violation is money laundering. So if country A and country B decide that country C is no longer allowed to trade with anybody, or with them, for example, anyone who attempts to do that is considered a money launderer, just for an example. So there's no question that money laundering is an inherently political question. So when we say anti-money laundering, essentially we're saying anti the rules that we've set up, and money is not allowed to exist outside of this system. And very interestingly, we see that conversation from the BlackRock CEO, Mr. Fink, where he talks about the perfect system to him, which would be one in which all of the transactions are transparent, meaning he can actually see them all. You can actually look at, and I shouldn't say he actually says this is the perfect system, but he's saying an ideal form of cryptocurrency where it's truly trackable and traceable, where you can see everything. His issue is with the pseudo-anonymity, as are all of these folks. But back to how did we get to where we are, right? Well, it started off in the 1970s. We had just off the Joe Valachi trials, where the U.S. government went after organized crime and discovered these organized criminals have a very complex system. It'd be great to have the banks help us by providing information on all these folks, so we can unwrap their structure and point out and convict them, essentially convict all the way to the top. That the money laundering that goes on for these organizations is massive. The Bank Secrecy Act, passed in I think it was 1973, requires banks to record all the information that happens and to get KYC information on their customers. It does not require them to review all the transactions, decide, oh, this looks like money laundering and this doesn't, and go after the ones that look bad, or report them rather. That took about 30 years. So it wasn't until 2001, after 9/11, that the Patriot Act was passed that caused that to happen. So when we see all these people in this video who are just, how are we going to allow this to happen? You have Lloyd Blankfein, going into histrionics over how you don't know if your Bitcoin transactions involve North Korea and Al Qaeda. It's because they're looking back to 9/11 and saying, oh, well, these rules were applied to us. This is a 2 decades old precedent. I don't think we shouldn't be presuming that this is a necessary thing to have. It's only been 2 decades that we've had it. It has not been a long-term precedent. Now, I understand the technology arguments and so forth, but the point is that it's not necessary, and it hasn't been necessary in the crypto space to have a global panopticon, to have some entity or group whose role it is to say, you're allowed in, this is good money, this is bad money, and that seems to be what all of these people, whether it's Janet Yellen or anyone else, is saying is, no, we need to be able to control it, we need to be able to have a group that can say, this is good and this is bad, and that is the premise that Bitcoin it has always been against, and there's no question about that. It's not debatable. No one thinks that Bitcoin was invented so that central bankers could make and other regulators could make sure that they can decide who's allowed to transact and who's not based on the laws that they pass. That's certainly not what it's about. It's supposed to be a check outside of the system, so that it's censorship resistant. So when I see people go on these shows and talk to these people, I see them make excellent points a lot of the time. The problem is they get trapped in that kind of argument that where the premise is wrong. The premise that we need a central authority to regulate all of the transactions and kind of figure out who transacted with whom on a regular basis. We don't need that. So getting into these 2 rules, I'll lay that out a little bit now. So the travel rule, FATF, which is an international organization, has nothing to do with the U.S. I mean, other than the U.S. involvement in it. It's not a U.S. regulatory regime. It's global, and it doesn't have any plenary authority or legal authority. It's just suggestions, but it allows countries to kind of work together and figure out what laws to pass and harmonize them. So the rule that they had proposed and passed was this travel rule, which required all the countries, which is most of the countries in the world, the member countries, to make sure that if there's a crypto business, typically an exchange, that exists and is licensed in their country or exists in their country, they need to make sure that this company is KYCing their customers, meaning collecting information, knowing who all their customers are to some threshold, and there's some leeway on there, a couple $1,000 typically. And they need to be able to trade that information with other banks, and in some instances, regulators. When I say banks, I mean crypto exchanges, so that the information travels. Hence the term travel rule. It's based on a '90s rule from the U.S. For travel. Information travels from bank to bank, which was right before the Patriot Act. I think this is from the late '90s. But in any event, that law got passed, and so we've been seeing a number of countries pass their own individualized travel rule laws, and we've seen the crypto space and exchanges get more serious. Many exchanges have already been serious about KYC, and I'll get into some details on that in a second about why that's important, that they have been self-regulating and getting serious about regulation on their own, which is a good thing. But then the other rule, which is even more fascinating and frankly scary, and it shows you the trajectory, is, to give you a little sense of it, first we have 70s, we had the Bank Secrecy Act. Mr. Bank, please keep track of where your customers are. We don't know if they're in the mafia. We want to subpoena that. 30 years later, no, Mr. Bank, you need to review all your clients and let us know. Anytime you see something suspicious, you have to report that up to the top. And the travel rule says, tell your friends if they ask you for any information on customers, because that'll help us. And then now we have A, the travel rule for crypto, and B, travel rule is not good enough because it only shows you the transactions between the exchanges. So they want you to have this new non-custodial wallet regulation where transactions with wallets have to be identified as well. So you could find yourself in a position where you KYC, you send your money to the bank, you want to send your Bitcoin to someone else, and they say, no, I'm sending it to my wallet. And you say, well, sure, here you go, here's the wallet address, and your crypto exchange needs to know who that is, and you don't want to identify them. And frankly, in the long run, this individual not being able to send your crypto task is a problem. But in the long run, the real issue is it's going to end the inherent transparency in crypto. Because in reality, we have, and this has been the case for as long as the space has been around for the most part, we have a very effective compliance and regulatory system already. What these banks and what the folks, our friends in this video, seem to want is a world in which you have the stuff, they have all the custody or most of the custody of the crypto. The world of Bitcoin in particular, the world of Bitcoin that exists outside of their custody is not seen as legitimate. You need to prove who it is, and maybe you can't prove who it is. If I told my exchange that this money is going to Joe Schmo, what am I going to need to provide their passport? At some point, it raises a lot of questions, this non-custodial wallet rule. And again, it's not been passed yet. It's in comment period, but I think it'll get passed. And we see the overall trajectory of where we're headed is to this place where this is what they want, transparent money, to the point where they know, there's a white chain where all the money is, it's between exchanges. And again, this helps with taxes and other regulatory things. It's not just for anti-money laundering, but that seems to be the main push on it. That's the main legal justification for it. And then there's this black chain of all the rest of the stuff that they don't know where it is. And so over time, that part of the chain will become worth not as much. You'll have to prove where it came from. There's going to be all these provenance issues and whatnot. And that is unnecessary. We do not need that world at all. We're getting pushed that justification from CNBC and Janet Yellen and the big banks who, let's be honest, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I don't think it doesn't take a genius to realize this is a lot. They're concerned about the dollar and stability and not just about money laundering. They'll tell you otherwise, that the dollar's fine and they're just worried about AML, but you can do your own math on that. The world that we should have in crypto is a lot like the one we already have. You have the white chain, whatever world where exchanges are KYCing, they're trading information with each other when need be. They know who their customers are, and they're required to do a level of due diligence. Then the next level, the gray chain area, which we don't know whose money it is, and we don't know the transaction. This is the big, healthy part of the blockchain, of all the wallets, right? Then we have the black, dark, bad chain at the bottom, which are the actual criminal activities that have actually occurred on the blockchain, and we know who they are. Whether it's Mt. Gox money or any exchange hacking or crypto locker hackers, actual crimes have been committed, wallets have been identified, and occasionally assets get seized and they go back up and become gray and white again. That functions for an international criminal legal system. That works. It works for crypto. It works for everybody else. It preserves the pseudo-anonymity in the system. That's what we want. We don't want this new, Lloyd Blankfein, Janet Yellen approved model. It's not good for the space. And again, I think we have to note that this is a norm that's only been around for 20 years. It's not an old norm. It's just not new. I'm sorry, it rather is very new. It is not an old thing that's been around for a long time. So when you go on these shows, when you go on CNBC, don't get pushed around. Don't let them tell you, and don't fall into the trap of saying, oh, no, Bitcoin's not money laundering, cash is the bad one. And again, it's true. Or we make the case the banking system is also, and we know from the FinCEN files that were released this summer that most of these FinCEN files are not getting followed up on. And there is a lot of money laundering through the banks. And again, this is just a trap, turning the argument into what is better for money laundering, Bitcoin or not Bitcoin. And it's a losing argument for people that are in favor of privacy always. The argument is the system works fine. We don't need a panopticon. We don't need a censorship of every transaction and of money. The U.S. government can do what it wants to do. No one can control that. American citizens have to comply with what the U.S. government does, or they face the consequences. It is what it is. But from a policy standpoint, from a public discourse standpoint, it requires resistance. And I hope that everybody who agrees on privacy and believes in privacy can agree on that. Thank you.